Welcome, and thank you for joining us for this special event. You know, it's beautiful here in Milwaukee tonight. I know we have people joining us from across the country. I hope that you're enjoying the special end of summer that we are. And this is wonderful to have this sort of night as we are on the real twilight of summer, to have such a great kickoff coinciding with the beginning of the academic year, to have our first, the inaugural Chancellor's Book Club series. We have a special night for you tonight. You know, these book programs are going to be really neat. You don't have to read the book. There's going to be no quiz. I think you'll get a lot more out of it if you do. We sent you the book, High Octane Brain by Dr. Michelle Braun, which I'll be introducing Michelle here in a moment. But I want you to know this is something that we plan on doing for several times throughout the year, and look forward to that. Keep an eye peeled for upcoming announcements about some of the different programs that we'll have. And toward the end of the night, I'll tell you who our next speaker is. Before I do that, though, I want to just share a little bit about why we think this is a neat opportunity. It's a wonderful way to enrich your lives. We think it's a wonderful way to dig deeper into some of the great authors who are affiliated with UW-Milwaukee, either as faculty, alumni, or just special friends. And tonight we have one who's gonna really, I think, top the chart in many ways. So I also want to introduce, we have a special co-host, my wife, Dr. Sara Swanson. And Sara worked with Dr. Braun at the Medical College of Wisconsin some years ago. So I really am looking forward to her helping me co-host and ask questions as we go through our event tonight. So before I introduce Dr. Braun, let me just share with you a few things about UW-Milwaukee. I know a number of you probably have questions about how's it going and what's the new year like. Let me tell you in a word: energetic. That's just the best way to describe what's happening. After almost 2 years of not being on our campus, the students are back, faculty and staff are engaged, and this community is on fire. It is really wonderful to have everybody back. Specifically, we're at about 97% of our fall 19 enrollment. Obviously, last year was different, but the dorms are also north of 95% of where we were 2 years ago, which is great on all fronts. But most importantly, we're back where everybody can engage meaningfully, where students and faculty and staff can really develop socially, where individuals can learn, whether it's in a lab or classroom or hallways or residence halls or socially. A lot of great things are happening on campus. Health and safety is vitally important to our campus, and that's why we've taken the actions that we have. We were the first campus in the UW system to require masks. We were the first campus, in fact, when the pandemic started, to pivot to go online. There's a number of firsts at UWM, and we'll continue to blaze the way to be first and foremost a safe and health campus. And it's in that context that we have healthcare so prominently featured, and why tonight is actually quite special for us to be able to talk about the health and some of the challenging aspects of brain health that we'll be engaged with tonight. So with that as background, let me get to the meat of the night, the star of the show, if you will. So it's my honor to be able to introduce you, Dr. Michelle Braun. Michelle, thank you for being with us tonight. This is going to be really special.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, and Sara, thank you again for co-hosting with me tonight.
Happy to do so.
So Michelle is an alumnus who graduated from UW-Milwaukee with her master's and her PhD in clinical psychology with a minor in neuroscience. She then went on to have completed her internships at both Yale and a postdoctoral fellowship at Harvard University. She's been an instructor in psychiatry at Harvard Medical School, and she also, a few years ago, appeared in the Milwaukee Business Journal 40 Under 40 as an award winner. Wow. You have done so much, and I really enjoy and read occasionally. You have a column on brain health in Psychology Today, and you're also a regular speaker at the Alzheimer's Association. You're really an expert with national and international appeal and impact, so we're really fortunate to have you. That's just a little bit of Michelle's background, and tonight we're going to discuss her book, which is titled High Octane Brain: 5 Science-Based Steps to Sharpen Your Memory and Reduce Your Risk of Alzheimer's. Michelle, welcome. I'm so glad you're here with us tonight.
Thank you.
Okay, well, let's get started. I'll ask a couple of questions, and then Sara, I'm going to ask you to take turns with the questions here tonight. First, Michelle, what prompted you to write the book in the first place?
I remember back when I started my clinical practice, and it was around 2005, and distinctly remember I had about a 60-year-old woman who came in to see me because she was really concerned about her memory. And she also had a family history of Alzheimer's. And so she was engaging in all sorts of strategies to try to maximize her brain health. And in the context of our conversation about that, she reaches into her purse and pulls out a bag and starts taking out supplements and putting them on my desk and said, well, what do you think? Is this the right thing for me to do? And at that time, I said, really, there's no support for supplements, but the good news is there's a lot of other science-based things that you can do. And it was interesting because it just so happened that last night I was in a drugstore and someone in front of me was buying a brain health supplement, and it was $35. And the clerk said to the customer, this must work because you're back here remembering to buy it. So here we are, 16-year span. And the unfortunate part about all of this is that people are still really mightily engaged in strategies that are pseudoscientific at best. And the costs of not engaging in some of the science-based strategies could not be higher when we think about the fact that Alzheimer's is impacting 55 million people worldwide. And if we even just focus a little bit more in on Wisconsin, and we have 120,000 people in our community who have Alzheimer's.
Wow.
And what's even interesting on another level is that if you look at individuals who are 45 and older, about 11% of our Wisconsin population is concerned about their memory, but over half of those folks have not talked to a healthcare provider. And so what we have here is this growing level of concern, which grows as our older adult population continues to exponentially grow. And these folks are really turning to strategies like social media or advertisements to try to figure out what can we do to kind of arm ourselves and maximize brain health. And there's this really crucial disconnect between the science of brain health and the implementation of those strategies. And so we are, as a field, really focused on not just diagnosis, but what can we do to promote brain health and how can we try to balance out those messages? And so it was really seeing that time after time, year after year, and having that kind of observation grow that led me to feel that having a tool like High Octane Brain that covers not just the what of the science, but also the how, which allows us to personalize the science. So it's really the science of brain health meets the science of behavior change coming together to provide a roadmap for people to kind of steer through those myths and the pseudoscience.
Well, there's this huge appetite, isn't there, for individuals who are interested in brain health, whether it's the youth who are looking to be able to study hard and be academically stronger, or, as you point out, the even larger population of individuals who are elderly and seeking for ways to keep their memories intact and really look at brain functioning in a lot of ways. And we're so fortunate to have the resources here, yourself and others, that can really provide a scientific perspective and one that's grounded in established methodology and proven practices. So you've written a book, and the book, High Octane Brain, relies upon a 5-step or Excel method. And that's kind of an acronym for the different steps that are involved. And they involve lifestyle, behavioral changes. Could you outline the Excel approach, please?
Sure. So one of the backdrops behind Excels was, again, this realization that we need to bring the science to life. And we often work better with acronyms in terms of cueing us to remember steps. And so it was really, again, trying to use that science of behavior change to present the material that led to that acronym. And then I wanted to make it fun and inspiring. So I thought Excels, we want to exceed our limits, and this allows us to do that. So the EX in Excel stands for exercise, which I also refer to as joyful movement, because I think people can engage a little more around that. The C stands for consume healthy foods. The E stands for engage and learn. The L stands for lower stress to boost well-being. And the S stands for sleep for better brain health. So I really tried to encapsulate an ordering effect as well, based on the support of the research for each of those steps, so that people could really kind of experience that big gain from that very first step.
Yeah, that's nifty. I like it. Excels. It just has a great ring and it is very memorable. So are any one of the steps more important than others, or are they all equal?
Yeah, that's a $1 million question. That's a great question because they're really best working synergistically. And so what I did was ordered those steps based on two main considerations. One was the current status of the research right now, and at the time the book was written, just about a year and a half ago. And the second was knowing what I refer to as kind of a positive ripple effect of the one step on the others, because I wanted to create kind of a self-generating internal motivation for people to continue the steps. So having exercise first, which I also think of as kind of a brain health home run because it really impacts all of those other steps, gives people the biggest boost, and it makes them more engaged to move forward with it. And so I also wanted to combat what I know we see a lot in clinical practice, which is people coming in and saying, I did 2 hours of crosswords, and they're foregoing the physical exercise and the other things that are really important. And it's also important to mention that some of these steps have just been studied longer than others.
Right.
So sleep is much more of an emerging frontier in the field of Alzheimer's research. And so by virtue of it just being newer, there's not quite that base of research, but we all can probably agree that sleeping well helps you exercise better. So, there's a nice integration of those steps, but those were the main factors I considered in ordering them.
This is terrific. I just have to reflect on how, as a research institution, UW-Milwaukee, in our neuroscience group, how important it is to have the research, to be able to draw from that, for you to be able to draw from, but also how you've contributed through your work and the great things that you've done. And not to take anything away from Yale or Harvard, where you've been, but UW-Milwaukee is mighty proud of you in terms of the contributions that you're making. So terrific. Sara.
It's so great to have you, Michelle. And I just want to congratulate you on this fabulous book. As we're both neuropsychologists, and so I get to see what people are saying about your book, and it's been highly acclaimed in our field. And for being both really accessible, but also based on research. So that's wonderful, a wonderful accomplishment. So, the most common thing we see our patients complaining of is memory problems. And you talk about these brain blips. So maybe you could talk about at what point should people be concerned about their memory issues? Because, forgetting is just a normal part of life.
Right. And I know we try to make that point to our patients so much because there are so many folks who are very concerned about their memory. So I would really distinguish a brain blip as something that is a normal, common, frequently experienced type of situation that all of us can relate to. So we might think of walking into a room and forgetting why, or misplacing an object. And I think one of the things those two issues have in common is they happen a lot during the day. And they happen so frequently, a lot of times, that our attention is divided while we're doing that. And so we can distinguish those brain blips from more concerning memory problems by thinking about three factors. So one is be a little bit more concerned if someone is forgetting well-known information that perhaps they use in daily life, like remembering the steps of a favorite hobby, or remembering the name of a person that they know really well, or the route to a familiar grocery store. Secondly, we'd be concerned if there was an increase in those memory problems over time, so that it wasn't just sporadic here and there and we would see it go away, but there seemed to be a pattern where there was more and more of that occurring. The third element that we often see clinically is perhaps someone else notices those memory issues. It may not always be the person who's experiencing them, paradoxically, because they might be forgetting that they're forgetting. And I'll add that that's not always the case. Some people are acutely aware of their memory issues, but when we see all three of those factors, I think it's grounds to just discuss the issue a little bit more and talk to, for example, a healthcare provider. And I always like to point out that having those three criteria does not mean that somebody has a concerning memory issue. It just means that perhaps delving into that a little bit more would be helpful. And so, in the context of a healthcare discussion, that often means maybe getting some labs or doing a neuropsychological assessment to get a statistically based measure of the software of our brain so that we can track that over time. But I love that question because we get asked that so much, like, how do we really distinguish? And that's really where we come in and add, I think, a lot of data-based information.
Thank you.
Well, that's great. And you just kind of went through a checklist of issues that when I think about my brain blitz, I'm so glad I have a neuropsychologist at home, and my help is right here. So I've got that covered.
Helpful I am. I point them out.
It's help every day. Very much the case. So Michelle, you talked a lot about stress, and the reduction of it is foundational, really important for brain health. And in the world that we're in today, everybody's experienced, it seems like, so much more stress. The events of the last year and a half, and thinking about the future. And there's a lot of different formulas for stress, but one of the keys that you seem to talk about a lot as Excel's starts, it is about exercise. Can you really talk more about the types of exercise and really some of the types of activities that might be helpful if there's other things, adjacencies, if you will, that are maybe around managing stress?
Absolutely. I think that is such a well-timed question because, as you mentioned, we're just coming off of a phase of time where we've been able to reopen, and obviously UWM has done that expertly, but then there's this other level of preparation that we need to think about, and that for some people has added another level of stress. So one of the things that I like about exercise as a strategy is it doesn't have to be intense or long. So there's some really interesting research on what are called acute exercise boosts. And those are about 10 to 15 minute cardiovascular engagements, which can really vary. They can, and I come back to the joyful movement piece because it should be something you love. Otherwise, there's really no use in doing it because it won't self-perpetuate. So whether that is dancing or whether that is hiking or skiing or biking, I know you both love to cycle, anything that is increasing that heart rate, preferably and always with healthcare approval at a moderate level of intensity. And we can talk a little bit about how to measure that for ourselves later. But that, even for 10 or 15 minutes, has been shown to increase attention and decrease stress. And it also helps with sleep, which then kind of cycles into stress management. Another way I look at exercise interacting with stress management is I look at athletes. I think about Giannis, for example, at the free throw line, right? Free throws are not necessarily, or hadn't been necessarily, his great strength, but he, over the course of the playoffs, was able to really get more into that groove. And one of the things he did, which is very consistent with a lot of other athletes, is he took a deep breath before he would shoot. And I think about the pressure he was under and the countdowns that were going on in the audience. And I think that that's a fantastic metaphor for exiting the mind. And this idea that when we think about stress and the reactivity of that, a lot of it is a thought process that can kind of snowball. And so what we're doing when we literally take a deep breath is we are exiting the mind and we're circumventing that and essentially flipping the switch on the parasympathetic nervous system, which is decreasing cortisol and then giving us a new perspective. So I think that metaphor of being at the free throw line when we're in the midst of stress and thinking about how do we center ourselves, we can learn a lot from professional athletes.
That's terrific. So it really does seem to be a mind-body connection, and the idea of shifting gears and using exercise to decompress, to get into a different place mentally is it sounds like very valuable. Can you remind us a little bit about the interrelatedness, some of that interconnectivity between these different aspects? Earlier, you talked a little bit what I would describe as either the synergy or the cumulative nature. Maybe remind us of how those pieces work together.
Yes. So one of the positive ripple effects that exercise has, I think, most profoundly on is mood. And so it really is a first line strategy for management of depression and in cardiovascular more so. And then anxiety, there's a really interesting base of research looking at strength training with anxiety and how that can really mitigate that. So we see that positive ripple into mood, and we certainly see it into sleep. In fact, one of the things we often recommend for people who have difficulty sleeping is if you increase your activity level during the day, you're physically tiring your body out, and therefore your sleep is a little bit more restful. One of the other really neat things about exercise is it dovetails into general cardiovascular health. And so we see then this positive ripple into improved heart rate, decreased risk of stroke, sometimes mitigation of diabetes. So I really think of it, again, kind of using that sports metaphor of a home run, where we're hitting all of those different bases. And it then, by getting better sleep, we can exercise more. If our mood is better, we may engage more in our exercise, we might sleep better. So a lot of times what we're doing with patients and individuals is trying to find where is that leverage point, where is the inflection point where we can start that positive cycle, because we want that ripple into those other areas.
Wow, that's great. Thanks.
Yeah, so in your book, you talk about super agers, and I'm really fascinated with these folks. So maybe you could explain to the audience what super agers are and how we can be one ourselves. I think there's some super agers in our audience here today.
I was excited to hear about that. I really have been fascinated for many years by super agers, and we can define that term as individuals who are 80 and older, who have cognitive functioning, memory functioning, often on par with 50 to 60-year-olds. And depending on the research, you look on sometimes 18 to 34-year-olds. Wow. So it's pretty amazing. And Dr. Sandy Weintraub and her group from Northwestern University really popularized the concept, which is now taken off globally. And because what really led them to look into this was seeing clinically, there are people who do not follow the trajectory of normal aging. There are people who are optimally aging, and they still do experience some level of cognitive decline. And if you look at brain scans, they're still experiencing some level of atrophy, but it's at a significantly lower rate. And so they have dug deeply into that group of folks. And we're talking about people who on a 15-word list of words may have total recall of those words 30 minutes later. I mean, this is an incredible group of people. And so what's fascinating, though, is if you look at the things that they have in common, it's not necessarily what we might expect. So the education levels vary from 8th grade education all the way through much higher education. Some of them have significant stress levels. Some of them are Holocaust survivors, for example. So it's not that we can say there was a stress-free life. Some of them are self-defined couch potatoes. So after we've done all this talk about exercise, there are some superagers who don't exercise and who do experience optimal brain health. So, but if we do drill down and look at what they have in common, there are a couple of interesting factors. One is low levels of negative emotion, or what we think of as anxiety or neuroticism. It's not that they don't experience that. It's that they have this sort of self-check where they are able to create a sense of well-being for themselves and have insight into that and intentionally try to modulate their mood. So that's one. The other is social engagement. So just like most people, as superagers, half of them are introverts, half are extroverts, but though, regardless of whether they're introverted or extroverted, they really love to connect socially. And so a lot of, Dr. Weintraub was telling me that some of them had requested to have parties, like they created that idea themselves and they wanted to mingle and talk and learn. And so that social engagement, that low level of what we think of as kind of negative lasting emotion, that in many cases potentially leads to resilience. And Dr. Weintraub talked not only about social resilience, but neuronal resilience. And perhaps there's some connection that we will discover about that.
This is fascinating. So let's shift gears a little bit and talk about sleep. That typically is something people say, and the experts recommend 8 hours of sleep a night. That's you see that in and out. But what if you get 5 hours of sleep and you feel refreshed?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that there is some normal variability, and the research would suggest that there are genetic predispositions that impact how much sleep we need. One of the things that's been surprising about the sleep research is it's been pretty consistent in suggesting that people who get 6 hours or less per night may not, even if they feel restored, be optimizing their cognitive functioning.
Mm.
And so one of the things that is sometimes recommended, and I'm somebody who probably doesn't get as much sleep as I should either, so I try to implement these strategies, is to take kind of a sleep vacation, so to speak, from having to wake up at a specific time. But if you set the bedtime at a specific time and then let your body wake up, if we have the availability to do that over a longer break, what often happens with folks is they start to sleep a little bit longer than they initially had. Oftentimes they're paying off kind of sleep debt that's in arrears, but then over time, they just start to sleep a bit longer, and you can actually see a little bit of a difference on cognitive testing. So it's kind of both sides of the coin are interesting to think about, that genetic predisposition, but also maybe testing those limits, even if we feel restored, and seeing what does our natural clock really require. And if it's still 5 hours, I don't think we would have too much grounds to say that that doesn't fit for us. But sometimes just double checking that can be helpful.
But sleep is, it sounds like, there are some exceptions, individuals who can get by on 5 or 6 hours, but the advice is still pretty sound to shoot for 7, 8 or more hours of sleep if you can get it per night.
Right. And I think what's interesting about that number range is some of that newer research is suggesting that even one night of not sleeping can increase the amount of amyloid beta that we have in our brains, which is one of the proteins. Essentially, we're all producing that all day, but that doesn't necessarily get cleared away in the same way that it does with sufficient sleep. And that's not cause for concern if somebody has one night of insomnia, but the question is, over time, if that pattern continues, is that a potential risk factor? And it's fascinating because what we know now more so about sleep is that we could kind of think of an analogy like the janitor's kind of coming in and cleaning out the system, so to speak, and we might unwittingly be circumventing that if we're not sleeping enough.
Great. So we've talked a lot about sleep. In the world today, as we talked earlier about the quick wins and easy answers, there's a lot of stuff out there that may not be as sound, may not be as well advised. There's a lot of prescription medicine for sleep. There's advice around warm milk. There's a number of dietary and other types of supplements and behavioral routines. What do you recommend?
I think it's really important to tailor the recommendation to the challenge that someone is having. So when we're working with our folks, we are often asking, what are you having challenge? Falling asleep, staying asleep, et cetera. And then that recommendation will shift. What is oftentimes helpful for people are two things. We can capitalize on what we know about associative learning in the brain. The fact that the brain often will learn what it is routinely made to do more frequently. And we can use something called a wind down routine that can be very helpful, knowing that the brain kind of moves into a relaxing mode when we cue it to do so. And I think about what we do with our children, when they're young. When we get them ready for bed, we don't kind of pluck them, from the field and say, they're, doing exercise and volleyball and things and say, okay, it's time for bed. They get into their pajamas and they go through the routine of brushing their teeth and having a story. So it's all winding down. And in the same way, we can benefit from that kind of a wind down routine and cueing our brain. It's time to move into that lower level of engagement. The second thing that sounds paradoxical, but it's really helpful for a lot of individuals who might find that the time they have to think through things is when they're in bed. And this happens with a lot of people where you finally have some quiet where you're not necessarily getting pulled in all directions. And then you think of all of the things that you need to do and that are coming up, et cetera. Very common. Paradoxically, if you're not able to fall asleep after 15 to 20 minutes, actually getting out of bed so that you are retraining your brain that bed means sleep, it doesn't mean thinking, and coming back into bed when you feel more tired after doing something relaxing and repeating that as needed can actually then retrain the brain that laying down in bed equals sleep, not thinking about everything that I have to do. So it does seem like the last thing you should do in the middle of the night when you can't fall asleep, that you should get up and do something relaxing, but it can be helpful.
So Sarah, I'm hearing two things. We got to quit bringing our work to bed at night, and we got to keep telling each other more stories. So I think those are strategies that we picked up on here. This is a huge benefit for us. You didn't know that's the real reason we wanted to have you over, but
I'm happy to oblige.
So another thing about sleep is, when you think about when you travel and you're trying to shift your clock and you need to get outside and get the sunlight. And that, we learned in biological psychology that the angle of the sun on your retina is training your circadian rhythms. And so, being outside can, help you get your sleep pattern reset. But now with everybody using devices and looking at their phone at night and reading on their Kindle, we're getting a lot of electronic light going in. And, what is your thought? Is that something that's, we all like to read before we go to bed, and some of us need larger print. And so we're looking at our Kindles. Is that a factor, do you think, for people who are struggling to sleep?
I do think so. And it's interesting to see that some of that science about minimizing blue light exposure has led to some really interesting devices that we can use to have the win-win of being able to kind of read without the negative impact. So blue light filters can be helpful. Many of the phones now have that kind of built in. But in general, even if we think about not having blue light access, having that light access even an hour before bed can impact sleep as well. So one of the nice things about when we think about, paper books or, going back to what is tangible, is that those types of materials can actually kind of induce sleep a little bit more than that electronic light. But you're right, we have to be so careful about light exposure because that unwittingly resets the pineal gland and tells us it's a different time than it really is. And that can impact the restoration level of our sleep.
Yeah, so this is kind of a tough question, I think. That these are really sound, scientifically based recommendations for things people can do for brain health. But what if someone feels or has a family history of Alzheimer's disease, or feels that they have a genetic predisposition, or maybe they even know that they have the ApoE4 allele? Are these methods things that can help them overcome that as well?
Mm-hmm. I'm happy to say that these methods work equally, if not more strongly, for individuals with a genetic predisposition. So that's such a common concern. And if we look at some of the research, there's two lines I think that are really promising. One is, a couple of years ago, there was a study, that's really kind of revolutionized our field, called FINGER, that looked at multimodal engagement in behaviors that reduce the risk of cognitive decline. So individuals had their blood pressure managed, they were engaging in healthy diet and cognitive exercise, and of course, physical exercise too. And what was interesting was, after just 2 years, there was a 30% reduction in the amount of cognitive decline they had versus a group that didn't engage in that. Equal amount of cognitive reduction of decline in individuals with an ApoE4 who were positive, had a family history, and who had a genetic predisposition. And if there was a look at other genetic risk factors, so if you look at telomere length, if you think about your shoelaces, the caps of those, like you could think of as the shoelaces as DNA strands, the caps of the shoelaces are telomeres, and the longer the telomere, the lower the level of cellular aging. And so individuals who went through FINGER who had shorter telomeres or advanced cellular aging benefited even more from that program. So that's one line. The other line that I still find just amazing is that the 1% of individuals who have what we call familial onset Alzheimer's, who unfortunately are guaranteed to develop Alzheimer's, which again is just 1% of individuals who had that genetic predisposition, who engaged in regular physical exercise, were able to back up the timeline of symptom onset by 10 to 15 years through exercise. And they had fewer levels of plaques and tangles. So they did develop Alzheimer's, as their genetic blueprint led them to, but a 10 to 15 year delay is amazing. So those are the two studies that I feel are really promising, and that I like to focus on when we have individuals who come in and they're really concerned.
Yeah, that's really exciting.
Mm-hmm.
So it sounds like you're not only able to slow down the effects of aging, but actually reverse them with the examples that you just gave. Is that? I understand that?
Yeah, I think slowing down is probably right now our greatest ability at this time, is to kind of slow the aging process down. And in some cases, if we think about acute exercise boosts, we might be able to kind of boost our memory a bit. The fact is we will all continue aging, but using these strategies can definitely slow that. And that's part of what I really like about these strategies, is they address the continuum of cognitive function. So on one hand, they do slow regular cognitive aging that all of us start experiencing on neuropsych testing from our mid-20s on. So they slow that rate. So literally, our brain is physiologically capable of being younger than our chronological age, but they work all through the continuum of mild cognitive impairment and even into the other end of the continuum, which is Alzheimer's disease, in terms of slowing down cognitive decline.
Okay. So in that context, you've talked about these strategies, you've talked about some of the tools. And one of the most powerful parts of the book is that you have the action plan. You have the high octane brain action plan, templates for that, as well as the tracker.
Mhm.
Can you describe how the action plan and tracker works? Because to me, when we talk about something that's useful, valid, and relatively easy to use, this is what's, I think, going to help a lot of our audience. Can you talk a little bit about those tools, please?
Sure. So one of the main pieces I wanted to try and figure out with this book was, how can I communicate the what and the how in a fun, salient way that makes people want to keep engaging. And so I actually brought a little copy to just demonstrate a little bit of what I'm talking about, because I think it's easier to visualize.
Sure.
So the high octane action plan is the way that you personalize the plan to your life. So you see each chapter has different exercises where, for example, you're encouraged to think about your whys for better brain health, because those certainly differ for all of us. So this is part of the how, is the actual action plan. And the tracker itself includes the Excel steps that we talked about. And what I did was mapped the different metrics on each of the columns that spell Excels, so that you can essentially fill in the octane levels, or how much time you have spent, for example, exercising, how many points you got from consuming healthy food. And this is a weekly tracker. So the idea is, you can see on the side, good, better, best, again, all research-based categories. The idea is that we'll start out at a baseline, kind of like we do our neuropsych baseline, and then over time, you can see visual progress as you fill in that tracker. Some of us are going to start out at excellent in some things because we're already great in some things, and sometimes not. So
yeah, well, it seems like this is so practical, so useful. What's been the reaction of people, whether it's patients, friends, others, to these tools?
So I think there have been two poles of reactions. One is a great amount of excitement and eagerness to use the tools. And then on the other side, some people will say, well, I already knew that diet and exercise were good. This didn't really tell me anything new.
Yeah.
And so part of what I like to point out is that a lot of folks who know that exercise and diet matter may have a bit of an incomplete understanding of how they really impact the physiology of the brain. And we're after the ignition of passion around this. And so when we describe that the little curled thumb-shaped structure that's 1.5 inches in towards the center of your head, behind each ear, is something that becomes denser, the hippocampus, which is your memory switchboard, with exercise. People go, really? It actually impacts the hippocampus? And so they get excited. So we want to ignite that by peeling back this idea of exercise and saying, no, it really preferentially impacts the hippocampus. If we had a medication or a supplement that did that, I think everybody would be taking it.
Yeah. Yeah, this is exciting. This is great. Sara, you want to ask some rapid fire questions, or?
I think those were your questions, but okay. So which of the 5 steps in Excel's method has been the most challenging for you to do?
I think it probably continues to be sleep, because I often am curious about a lot of things and thinking about a lot of things. So I was particularly interested when I interviewed Dr. Lucy and about sleep, and was asking a lot of those questions, because I relate to the idea of needing to improve that. So I'm always working on that.
Okay. Well, for me, I thought that, chocolate should be the bottom of the food tree. So that's mine.
Well, I think it should.
Wine and chocolate.
Yeah.
So what's your most favorite memory from UWM?
Well, I have a couple of levels of favorite memories. One was getting, to meet you and your colleagues at MCW and work with you. UWM has amazing community partnerships, and that obviously springboarded my career into neuropsychology. So thank you for being such a great role model and mentor for me. It's been very meaningful.
Well, it's been a joy to watch your development in your career and successes.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I feel like the way that UWM has been able to engage with so many community partners and really create careers that are so meaningful, and then kind of feedback is so crucial.
Yeah,
So that's one huge positive memory for me.
that's great.
So Michelle, what's your next project?
So my goal at this point is to try to bring this to life a bit more, and perhaps to do that in ways that are a little bit more personally engaging for people. So maybe having some social support groups around these ideas where we can come together as a community and engage. I'm particularly interested in the role of exercise and brain health. And so I'd love to think about new developments along those lines. And I have some ideas about, for example, one of my passions is dance. And so perhaps in integrating some brain health into dance a little bit more. So I think really trying to breathe life into this a bit more and make it a little more engaging for folks is my goal.
Oh, that's great. It's been really hard for people who love to exercise, but also the social aspect of exercise. If you were on a tennis team, or you went to a club or a gym and you had your exercise classes, and that was an impetus for doing your workout, but also having those social interactions. And a lot of that went away with the pandemic. So hopefully that will come back. And I would think dance you're probably doing with other people.
Yes, yeah, exactly. No, it's so true. And that's part of why it's so great to hear that everything's back up and running so much at UWM too, because people can kind of plug in a bit more to those social activities.
Yeah, what we know about, a lot of times people in the college setting will say, well, it's 18 to 25-year-olds that need the social development and so forth. I have colleagues that are 60, 80, and 95 who say, I need social development. Don't just, have it for the college age students. And it really is meaningful. And this is why I'm so grounded in this idea that if we can't bring people back, we're not going to have the vitality, we're not going to have the learning, we're not able to conduct research and really engage in the community in the ways that you describe and that so well. So it's really special to have everybody back, and we're doing everything we can to continue to foster that. Well, Michelle, last question. It sounds like, just standing back, it sounds like there's not one answer. This is not easy. This is actually incredibly complex. But you've done us all a great service by pulling things together, creating a framework called Excels, and showing the mind-body connection, showing that it's not just the crossword puzzle 2 hours that compensates for the lack of exercise, or vice versa. I can't just go out and ride with Sara, 40 miles and feel like, the brain is going to fire on all cylinders now. But what would be, if you had to summarize maybe a message that's useful, that helps us in terms of getting our arms around this incredibly complex subject? Final words in terms of what might be useful in terms of the high octane brain to really bring it home.
I think if we think about the idea of brain health as a marathon that we're all on, and it's just a part of life, it's kind of like sleep. It has to be kind of a component, because if we think about this 3-pound super organ that controls everything we do, and it not only taking care of it not only helps to maximize memory, but it helps in conversation, it helps us engage in our livelihoods, it helps us succeed in business and do the things that are important to us. So I think that if we think of the high octane brain as sort of our goal, our personal best goal, because that's really the definition, is what is our personal best? How can we reach it? And we reach it with these methods. And the idea that that personal best then transcends just brain health. It impacts our social engagement. It impacts our quality of life. It impacts our relationships. So thinking about that as really the keystone to success and the keystone to our well-being is so important.
Powerful. Thank you so much. So grateful for you to be here. So proud of you as an alumna of UW-Milwaukee and the great contributions that you're making to practice, to people's lives and health. Wonderful to have you. Sara, thank you for co-hosting. Wonderful to share the stage with you here today. And this has been a very special night.
It's been great having you, Michelle.
Thank you.
Congrats again on this book.
Thank you.
Really neat. Well, and to our audience, thank you so much for joining us tonight. This is the inaugural Chancellor's Book Club series. Look forward to more of these types of events in the future. I really appreciate all the support that you've given to UWM for so long, and know that we want to continue enriching your lives, giving back in ways like we have tonight. I also would encourage you to stay tuned for our next book, our next author, and it's going to be Professor Emeritus Larry Baldessaro. Larry has written a book about Tony Lazzari. The book is titled Tony Lazzari, Yankees Legend and Baseball Pioneer. I know you'll enjoy this event, and I hope that tonight has been special for you. I know it has been for us, and thank you. Have a wonderful rest of your evening. Good night.